Atheists of Reddit, what stopped you from being religious? Lack of evidence. Even when I was a Christian kid, I didn't really believe. Other than going to church, Christian music, and the occasional youth group, I never did anything religious. I never read my Bible or prayed outside of church. When I turned 18, my mom stopped making me go, and I didn't hesitate to stop going forever.
It's pretty common to go through a phase like that. A lot of people feel the pressure to fit in with the beliefs around them but don't really connect on a personal level. Once you get that freedom, it's like a weight is lifted. You just do what feels right for you.
I grew up in a Catholic home, attended a Catholic school, and did all that jazz. None of the stories ever made sense to me when confronted with the realities of the world outside the doors of the church. I had a classmate who died of cancer at the age of 10. What possible reason could God have for that? What plan would be so cruel as to take a child from her parents, her friends, her very life? I can't recall ever believing in God, but that moment probably cemented my refusal to consider belief.
It's tough when life hits you hard like that, especially at a young age. Losing someone so innocent makes you question a lot, especially when it goes against everything you've been taught. It puts everything in perspective, doesn't it? For some, those moments lead toward faith, while for others, like you, they push them away. It's just one of those things that shapes who you are.
I was raised Christian, but it just didn't work out. I found it hateful, abusive, and controlling. I have tried other faiths. I've tried other types of Christianity, and I've even tried non-Abrahamic religions. Still found the same issues. I'm very well aware it could be a people issue more than a faith issue, but I figure it's a lot easier to just not participate.
I get that. Religion can be really tough sometimes, especially when the people around you don't reflect the values you're looking for. It's kind of exhausting trying to find community in places that feel more like a trap than a support system. Sometimes stepping away feels like the best choice for your own peace. It's all about finding what fits for you, even if that means opting out altogether.
I have always been a bit slow on the uptake with some things, so it took me until sophomore year in prep school to realize it was all bullshit. There was a Jesuit deacon teaching a course called Finding a Faith of Your Own, which was designed to give us teenagers the illusion of agency by demystifying parts of the Bible. He was in the middle of explaining how numbers were used symbolically in the Old Testament, and how any given number could mean as long as it took. 40 days and 40 nights equals as long as it took, etc. Trying to wrap my head around this new information, I asked about when Jesus multiplied the loaves and fishes, and was nervously interrupted with, "No, that's the New Testament. Everything in the New Testament is literally true. We are talking about the Old Testament and how symbolism applies to that book. We don't ever question the word of Jesus." Right then I saw through the ruse. The veil had been lifted by logic and critical thinking.
It's interesting how moments like that can change your perspective. I remember a similar experience in class where something clicked for me. The teacher was going on about history, but then a comment made me see it all differently. It's like suddenly realizing the patterns behind the stories we hear. That shift can really open your mind to questioning everything you've been taught. Sometimes, that realization feels liberating.
This question feels so weird to me, like maybe it's because I'm not a native English speaker, but it feels like it sort of implies that being religious would be the logical, deterministic conclusion of one's spirituality, except for some people where something made them become atheists. It feels this way to me because nothing stopped me. I never was religious, nor was I ever really interested in becoming religious. I grew up in a secular environment and family, got curious about faith and religions, notably for their role in our society and history, but that's the extent of it. I'm glad for people who find comfort in religion. I'm appalled at how some others use it to justify terrible things they do, but there's no activism in my atheism.
I get where you're coming from. Growing up in a family that didn't really focus on religion can shape your views. It's interesting to see how people find comfort in faith while others misuse it. I've known friends who explore spirituality deeply, while I just prefer to understand it from a distance. Everyone has their own path, whether it's in faith or not, and that's okay. Just no pressure either way.
Nothing, I just never had any faith or belief in the supernatural. This includes religion, ghosts, spirits, tarot, horoscope, crystals, karma, cryptids, and so on. I was raised in a Christian family and studied in a nunnery. The nuns were always very respectful to me. I didn't have any particular bad experience with religion, and for all intents and purposes, I was raised in an environment that should promote someone religious. There are leftovers of it in me. I say Lord, God, and religious expressions a lot. God bless, and so on. I also like studying religions and reading about them. Someone of faith once told me that I may be an atheist, but I'm religious, so take what you will from that. But I do not believe in any higher power, and I realized that very early, like when I was 7 to 8. I see no evidence for believing in it, but I respect other people's faiths.
It's interesting how you can grow up in a religious setting but still find your own path. Being surrounded by nuns and faith yet feeling detached from it speaks to the complexity of belief. It's cool that you still engage with religion in a scholarly way. I guess your experience shows that belief is pretty personal, and you can appreciate others' faith without sharing it. That's a mature approach.
I'd say I just grew out of it as I became more logical. I was raised Catholic, but was doubting it by 14 or 15 at the latest. My parents made me go to Sunday school and get confirmed anyway, which was an important factor as I experienced being coerced to believe. Ultimately, there just isn't any evidential reason to believe that a God exists, let alone the specific God of any human religion, of which there are of course many. There was no single moment when I fully internalized that. It happened over time.
It's interesting how our beliefs change as we grow up. I had a similar experience with religion. My parents took me to church, but I started questioning things around that age too. They wanted me to follow the traditions, but I just couldn't connect. It felt more like pressure than faith. Over time, I just leaned into what made sense to me, and the doubts grew until I realized I didn't believe in it anymore.
I don't believe it. I have literally tried to make myself, but it's like if you told me to suddenly believe in the Easter Bunny. I can't force it. Growing up in a very Christian household, I still remember feeling weird about the whole thing. Science has always seemed like the way to go, and it isn't even a belief. I don't have to force myself to believe the earth is round. We've proven it. And when it's wrong, it changes. Also the guilt, fear, bigotry, and 1 to 2 hour church services.
It's interesting how experiences shape our beliefs. I grew up with similar feelings about religion, just a sense of disconnect. I remember sitting through long church services and thinking about how much time it took. Science seemed more straightforward, like you said, easier to accept without the guilt. It's a journey figuring out what makes sense to us. We all have our own paths, and it's okay to question.
For me, it meant being less curious, as my much more religious family just never questioned or challenged anything. I can't bear living like that. I'm aware not all people who are religious are like that, but all of the "you'll find answers by him soon" never resonated, especially considering the actual text say, he only helped those who sought answers. Guess I wasn't seeking right.
I can relate to feeling stifled by those around you. Growing up, I had friends whose families were very set in their beliefs, and it made me question a lot. It was hard not to feel like I was missing out on something. I realized that seeking my own answers was important, even if it didn't fit the norm. Everyone has their own path, and exploring it can be confusing but necessary.
Reality, I guess? Science and evidence wins out every day, but I do respect anyone who chooses to believe, as long as they don't force those beliefs on others. My parents aren't religious, but always supported whatever I chose. Grew up in a small town, and the only school was attached to the local church, so I'd enforce Lord's Prayer and hymns at assembly each day. Genuinely, all I got from that was "Herald be thy name," which seemed an oddly specific name for a deity.
Sounds like an interesting upbringing. It's kind of cool that your parents let you choose for yourself. Growing up in a place where religion was part of school must have been different, especially with the rituals. The line about "Herald be thy name" is funny. It's odd how something so specific can stick with you. Makes you think about the influences we have in our childhood.
I was raised religious to an extent. I just always had a hard time believing. While doing confirmation class, I asked an innocent question on one of our lessons because I wanted to understand. I was 12. I don't remember verbatim, but no, it was along the lines of why do bad things happen like kids have cancer? If God can help, why doesn't he? I was yelled at, told I was being difficult, and made to sit in the corner. The instructor told everyone to not speak to me. That drove it home for me.
That sounds tough. Asking questions is part of understanding, especially at that age. It's a shame that instead of having a conversation, you were isolated for it. It kind of shows how complicated beliefs can be, and how some people react poorly to genuine curiosity. It must have made you rethink a lot about faith and the responses from those who claim to have all the answers.
I was doing a Beth Moore Bible study. She directed us to reread the story of the fall in Genesis and asked us to answer, who lied to Adam and Eve? God tells Adam if he eats the fruit he will die. The serpent tells Eve God lied. You won't die. He is afraid you will become like him. God says to himself, if they eat the fruit, they will become like us. Adam and Eve eat the fruit. They don't die. They suddenly have knowledge they didn't have before. Knowledge only God had before God lied. The serpent told the truth. That wasn't the answer Beth Moore wanted, but it's the plain reading of the text. Rereading the whole Bible with new eyes, it was over.
It's interesting how different perspectives can shift our understanding. I remember discussing the same story with a friend. We were both raised with one interpretation, but when we dug deeper, the layers started peeling back. It made us question a lot about trust and truth in the text. Sometimes, just looking at things again can alter your whole outlook. It's like suddenly seeing a picture in a new light.
Context. I was baptized Catholic as a baby, but my parents never attended church or hinted to me that they believed in God or anything. Growing up, my parents did not push any religion onto myself or my sister. They let us ask any questions we wanted and would get us age-appropriate books for any religion or story we wanted to learn about. Friend invited me to their synagogue. My parents let me go. Their Christian church's youth group. My parents let me go. Mosque. Parents let me go. Polish Orthodox Church? Same deal. They tried their best to let us come to our own conclusions without bias, and my conclusion always was that they were fascinating stories, but that's it, stories. I could never justify it to myself, but I enjoyed exploring and witnessing it from an outsider perspective.
It's interesting how your parents took that approach. By letting you explore different religions without any pressure, they really opened up a world of ideas for you. It sounds like you got to appreciate the stories and traditions without feeling obligated to believe in any of them. It's a unique way to grow up, for sure. Just getting to witness those different practices must have given you a lot to think about.
The Bible stories I was told as a kid in school never made sense to me, especially since there's none of that happening nowadays when it supposedly happened all the time. Stuff like the entire planet flooding to get rid of all the bad people, angels coming down to send messages, the sea being split and creating a walkway. The idea of some being existing out there that always listens to you and helps you also never made sense to me. I know the entire idea of believing in religion is that you shouldn't need proof, but to me religions are just a mix of fantasy and teaching good morals, and also some bad ones. that exists to put people's mind at ease/guide them through life if they're scared of death, or previously to explain things we didn't understand.
I get where you're coming from. Religion often feels more like stories than concrete reality. I remember talking with a friend about these tales from childhood, how they seemed so far-fetched. We laughed about how they just didn't match up with our experiences. It made us think about why people cling to these beliefs. For some, it's comfort, while for others, it's just a collection of old myths woven into life lessons.
Lax on the whole religious thing growing up, the idea of God and religion floated in and out of my psyche personally. Then, and this one is weird, I read Holes by Louis Satcher and watched the movie. My thought process following was if an all-good and all-powerful God was real, he would not have let that happen to Sam. And that was that. Outside of that, I just never found much need for religion to feel complete.
It's interesting how stories can shape our beliefs or thoughts. I can relate to moments in life where a book or movie just resonates on a different level. It's like a light bulb goes off. Reading Holes made you question things a bit more, and sometimes that's all it takes. I guess for some, literature can become a catalyst for deeper reflection, even if we don't follow any strict beliefs.
I just never accepted it like my family. There's lots of questions I've always had that I will never sum up to because Jesus. Even as a kid, when we go to a church, I always felt like an imposter. I'll play along out of respect for others if I'm in a church for, say, a funeral or something. I'll never talk down to people that are religious, and I'm glad my family just let me decide for myself to attend things with them or not.
It's interesting how some people can just accept things at face value. I remember going to church with friends, feeling out of place but never saying anything. It's cool you found a way to respect their beliefs without compromising your own views. Sometimes, just being there for others, like during tough times, is what's important, even if you don't fully connect with the reasons behind it.
I have always been an atheist. What is a fun story is that a good friend of mine was raised in the American Bible Belt, but moved to my state, Colorado, in her 20s. After we became close, she asked me what church I was raised in. I said, "Oh, none. I don't believe in God." And she has said that until that day, she did not even realize that was an option. She had not believed God existed for a while at that point, but assumed religion, etc. was just a thing everyone had to have. So she's an atheist now, although is super into horoscopes, which I kind of hate, but probably would still be kind of a floating Christian if we hadn't had that conversation. Some people just need to have their worldview expanded.
That's interesting. It's kind of wild how someone can grow up in a certain environment and not even know other options exist. Your friend probably had a lot of assumptions based on her upbringing. It's cool that your conversation opened her eyes to a different perspective. People do get so stuck in their bubbles. The horoscope thing is a little odd, though. Guess everyone finds their own path in different ways.
I was born and raised in Ireland as a Catholic as a child in the 80s. As a teen in the 90s, a number of scandals revolving around child physical and sexual abuse, as well as stealing babies from unwed mothers to sell to Americans for adoption dropped, and I turned away completely by age 15. I wasn't finished with gods after this. I decided to read the Bible for myself, as well as the Quran, Bhagavad Gita, Tao Te Ching, Buddha Sutra, and the like. That pretty much did them all in for me, except Buddhism, which really spoke to me at the time. But then I got into science in my 20s, and that finished them all off for me. Though it was really Darren Brown's book on magic, Tricks of the Mind, that suggested religions were all houses of cards which collapse easily if you chip away at any part of them.
It's interesting how experiences shape beliefs. Growing up with a specific faith can create a strong identity, but sometimes events make you question everything. Exploring different religions can lead to new insights, and then diving into science brings a whole different perspective. That moment when you realize the structures we build can be fragile is tough, but it seems like it opened up a more grounded way of seeing the world for you.
I have deeply religious in-laws. My wife isn't religious though, and early on in our courtship, I was asked outright why I didn't believe. I fluffed around a bit. I never want to be disrespectful, and eventually hit upon the simple, I see no reason to be. I've yet to see, read, or hear any argument of explanation that convinces me that I should outside of simple choice. That's it.
It's interesting how belief can shape family dynamics. You navigated that conversation well, balancing respect and your own views. It's not uncommon to encounter differences in faith, especially in relationships. Your approach of keeping it straightforward works, especially with sensitive topics. At the end of the day, it's about understanding each other, even if you don't share the same beliefs. Sounds like you're handling it just fine.
I don't actually know if I consider myself atheist, so maybe I shouldn't answer this. I am still grappling with my beliefs. But I grew up in a community that was very cloistered, very religious, and filled with hate and intolerance masked as the Word of God. I've always loved to read, and the Bible I read and the beliefs of those in the commune were so detached from one another that I started to see the cracks. I got out of that life and am still recovering the pieces of myself. I don't know what I believe now. I have trouble believing this is all random chance, even if the argument is that given enough time, the universe is bound to make life like ours. I think there is too much wonder and synchronicity for this all to be happenstance. Perhaps it's not a divine intelligence that guides us, but I think that there must be some underlying force with a hand on the wheel, however light the touch may be.
It's tough figuring out beliefs, especially when you grew up in a place with such strict ideas. I can relate to the struggle of finding your own path after breaking away from something so limiting. Those moments of doubt mixed with wonder can open your mind. It's okay to feel lost for a while. Exploring those feelings can lead to a clearer understanding of who you are and what you believe.
I was brought up in a Church of England school with all the Bible stories and hymns. I think I was about 8 or 9 when I found out there were other religions, and it was a bit baffling. Like, how can all these different people believe all these different things and worship all these different gods? That was enough for me to take a look at things and make my own mind up. And so I did.
I get that. Growing up in a certain environment shapes your views. I remember when I first learned about different cultures and beliefs too. It's tough to figure it all out, especially as a kid. But exploring those differences helped me understand more about the world. It's interesting how that curiosity can lead to discovering your own beliefs. Everyone's journey is unique, and that's okay.
As a youngish kid, I had a single moment of genuine, earnest prayer raised by atheists, in which I asked any god that if they were real, to give me a sign. I didn't know what sign, but I figured an omnipotent God would know exactly what to do to convince me. Never got one. And even if a God exists, I'm not interested in one that would condemn someone just for not believing in them.
This reminds me of a time when I was curious about faith. I used to ask my friends about their beliefs and why they mattered to them. It was interesting hearing their perspectives. Like you, I also wondered if there was something out there. But after some deep thinking, I realized it's okay not to have all the answers. Everyone has their own journey.
I was born that way. I may live in Germany, but at that time and in that area, this still was a thing. I was third-generation atheist. My grandfather became one before WW1, after his father died and the relatives of his mother beat him in a church in confirmation. He was Lutheran. Being atheist was a scandal back then.
That's an interesting background. It's wild to think how beliefs can shape families over generations. Your grandfather's experience with religion shows how personal and societal pressures can clash. Living in a time when being an atheist was a big deal seems tough. It's a reminder of how beliefs can define social status and relationships. Now it feels like the conversation about religion and belief has totally changed.
Raised Southern Baptist, which made it easier. My family believes dinosaurs are fake and the bones are a trick by Satan. Also, FYI, the Earth is 5,000 years old. I really liked dinosaurs as a kid and realized that the adults telling me dinosaurs didn't exist were just obviously wrong. So the main answer here is probably just public school education. My family learned from their mistake, me, and all my siblings went to private religious schools where inconvenient facts weren't brought up. I probably could have let that go, but the Bible is pretty clear about how you should treat those less fortunate, and our preacher said flat out that homeless people are lazy and deserve it. Also, some other kid asked, "Does God always forgive?" And everyone said yes. Then he asked, "Why is anyone in hell then?" No answers, and he got kicked out of Sunday school and beaten by his parents. That sealed the deal.
This story hits home. Growing up in a strict environment can really shape your views. I had a similar experience where I questioned the beliefs around me. It's tough when you see things differently from those you're close to. That moment with the kid asking about hell really shows how harsh the responses can be. It makes you think about how some beliefs can push people away instead of bringing them together.
To this day, I still try to live as a good Christian would, following Jesus' example, showing love and empathy towards others. It's the fact that mainstream Christianity feels like anything but that, so I've distanced myself from that identity. I also believe in the scientific method. The universe is 14 billion years old, evolution, etc. So faith-wise, I've shifted more agnostic.
It's interesting how people can evolve in their beliefs. I had a friend who grew up in a strict religious household but eventually found that the teachings didn't align with their personal views. They focused more on kindness and understanding rather than doctrines. It's a personal journey for many, balancing spiritual beliefs with scientific understanding. It shows that faith can be complex and unique for each person.
I wanted to get confirmed. Seemed like the thing to do, and my form teacher in my school was super religious, so she did a good job at impressing the benefits on me. Half a year of intense, weekly Bible study later, I knelt down by the altar, said the words, "Receive the blessing." It was like a switch went off in my head. This is all nonsense.
It's interesting how you can go through something so serious, and then just feel like it doesn't mean anything. I had a similar experience with a ritual back in school. Everyone expected it to change me or something. But once it was done, I just felt nothing. It makes you rethink what you really believe in and how much of it is just for show.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.